Good morning, everyone. Morning. Glad we are here again to honor God, to worship Him and listen to His Word so that we will be having something to live with for the entire week and be recharged again with the Spirit and the presence of the Lord in our midst as we worship Him corporately this morning. The Word of the Lord would be coming from the book of Hebrews, chapter 13, verse 16. Hebrews 13, verse 16. This is actually a continuation of what we have discussed last week. So we will read from verse 15 so that we will see the bigger picture this time. Hebrews chapter 13, verses 15 and 16. I'll read from the New American Standard Bible. It says here, "Through Him then, let us continually offer a sacrifice of praise to God. That is, the fruit of lips that give thanks to His name. And do not neglect doing good and sharing, for with such sacrifices, God is pleased." May the good Lord bless the reading of His Word. Last week we discussed about the necessity of uttering to the Lord, saying the word of praise to Him. Because if we see the background of the text that we just have read, it gives us the idea that we no longer need to bring animal sacrifices to God so that we will be acceptable in His holy presence. But all we need to do is bring our praises to Him. That's a new kind of sacrifice. But the writer of the book of Hebrews did not end in verse 15. He encouraged and he taught the readers to do something further from that just saying and uttering the praises to God. Because there is another kind of new sacrifice that we could bring to our Lord. And that is in the aspect of doing. Last week I said we need to utter, we need to say the words. If we have a praise to God, say it audibly with words coming from our mouth. That concern has something to do with our vertical way of sacrifice. Vertical meaning to say a direct connection that you have to your God and that you personally experience His goodness, His kindness. And you would say to Him, "Lord, this is who you are based on what I have known you. This is who you are. I just like to declare who you are in my life, who you are in the life of the church. I just would like to declare what you have done for me. Because you have shown kindness, you are gracious. You died for me on the cross. That's so wonderful for me to imagine. You are wonderful. You are amazing." You declare those words to the Lord. That becomes your sacrifice of praise. But there is a new sacrifice that would be learned this morning. It is not just a sacrifice of praise, uttering of words to God, but a sacrifice of action. That is why last week I entitled the message, "Say It." This time it's "Show It." A new kind of sacrifice. That what we have experienced with God, how we perceive Him, how He revealed Himself to us, it would be reflected on how we relate with others. So if we discussed last week on a vertical kind of sacrifice, this time we will be discussing about a horizontal kind of sacrifice. Because this kind of sacrifice affects the people surrounding us. This is not just you and God, or your Creator and the creature. Not just the one who was the source of the blessing and the one who received the blessing. But today we will be discussing about those individuals surrounding us in relation to our God. So we come here not just utter praises to Him, but we come here to relate with each other, and according to the advice of the writer of the book of Hebrews, doing good and sharing. Now I want us to take note that he started verse 16 with the word "and." It's a conjunction, meaning to say he's connecting the idea from the previous verse. And it gives us the idea that as if the previous verse teaching is so important, the following line or the next statement connected by the conjunction "and" gives us the idea that it is as important as the previous idea that he gave. So this sacrifice is so important also. And he said there, do not neglect. Do not neglect. Because there is a tendency for human beings when we already achieve or we already, experience God and we see who He is, we are so contented already of knowing Him with the declaration that we have for Him. Lord, you are this. Lord, you are this good. You are kind. You are gracious. We say those words and sometimes we neglect that there are people around us and there is a relationship that we need to take care surrounding us also. And that is why he said, do not neglect, do not forget, do not overlook, because this is as important as your sacrifice of praise. That is why when we begin thinking about our relationship with God, we should always be aware that this must be reflected on how we relate with the people around us. And his admonition was this, do not neglect what? Doing good and sharing. If you read the NIV, the words following do not neglect verb are not in participles, but they are infinitives. Do not neglect to do good, to share. But it gives us the same sense that we have to sacrifice something to God by relating with the people around us. And in the way we relate, it is very important to Him. And I want us to look at very closely what he's saying here in the words doing good. When we do good, this is rooted in the fact that we are already good. Take note. This is rooted or coming from the idea that we are already good. So through the sacrifice of Christ, we have been made righteous through the righteousness of Christ. And because we are righteous, that makes us good. Not based on our action, not based on our achievement, but it is based on what Christ has done for us. Meaning to say, that person seated next to you is righteous because of the righteousness of Christ imputed in his life. That person seated right next to you is good because Christ resides in him, and God is good because God has displayed that in his life. So the goodness that is mentioned here, doing good, is now coming from the idea that we are good. Okay? Take note. We are not doing something so that we could be branded as good. Christ did something, that is why we are good. I hope you wouldn't miss that. And so when the writer of the book of Hebrews said, doing good, it is a result of your being good. Being is always coming before the doing. So God has made us good already, and because we are good already, doing good should be a fruit of that goodness that Christ has given to you and to me. It is now living the self-centered kind of life that we always think of ourselves, that we begin thinking about people around us, and we begin asking not the question, what would I benefit? What will I get out of this? But we will begin asking the question, how will I share to other people? What benefit will others get from me? So it is other-centered than self-centered kind of life. Serving, doing good to others. And he continued with the participle sharing. Sharing. In studying the text, I realized that the original word for sharing, or in the NIV, it's to share. The original word was actually koinonias. And that's kind of surprising to me because the word koinonia is not often translated as sharing. Koinonia is always often translated as fellowship. And I think this idea is very necessary as we understand what the author is conveying to us. Because when we begin thinking about just simply sharing the way we define it in our society today, because when you say share, you have something and you share that matter to other person. For example, I receive much food. I'll share that food. I receive much money, I'll share that money. So you share that matter that you receive from God. But when you begin seeing now how the author is conveying the idea from the root word koinonia, which is fellowship, it gives us the sense now that when we begin to share, we don't just share our resources, but more than that, we share the life that we have. So when we begin to fellowship with other people, we don't just share what we have. We share our life. And along with that sharing our life is the sharing of the time that we have. I believe one of the best gifts that a person can offer to another is time. You spend 10,000 pesos, $500, you can just earn it again. But you spend an hour to a person, you can never get that time back again. Once you gave it, it's already given. It's gone already. It is so precious. And I believe the idea that the author is conveying here is not just sharing your possession, but more than sharing your possession is sharing the very life that you have, and that can only happen if you have a fellowship with other believers. It is so important, and I believe the author would like us to understand this when he said, do not neglect doing good and sharing. Sharing your life, your time, your resources to someone who is needy around you. And you know what? I observe in the scripture, especially among in the letters of the New Testament, that whenever the idea of sharing and doing good is mentioned, it is always within the context of a family, a group of believers, a church. And it overflows to the outsiders. So it starts within the church. The idea is like, if you cannot be kind to your own family, how could you be kind to your neighbor? If you are not concerned about your brother and sister in your house, how could you be kind and concerned about people on the streets? So it starts within the home. It starts within the church in our context. And the writer of the book of Hebrews is saying here, you start to be concerned about your fellow believers. You share with your fellow believers as you fellowship with each other. And this will have like a ripple effect to the outsiders. Because through this, you are doing something to God. You are offering a sacrifice to God. Again, in the Old Testament, in the Old Covenant, you offer a sacrifice so that you will be made right, a sacrifice through animals. But in the New Testament, you no longer need to offer an animals as a sacrifice because you are already accepted by God. You have been made righteous by God. So you come into the presence of God and bring your praises to Him as a sacrifice. And now you bring your actions to Him in relating with the people surrounding us. Your good works among other people is presented as a sacrifice to your God. I like what Billy Graham said. The highest form of worship is the worship of unselfish Christian service. I'll repeat that line. The highest form of worship is the worship of unselfish Christian service. That when you begin to think about the welfare of others, that you share something without expecting something to receive. That's a wonderful way of service, and that's your sacrifice to God. When you share something and you expect something in return, I believe it's not sharing, it's investing. Because you are expecting for a return of investment. But if you share something to someone without expecting the person to do the same to you, regardless of the person's possible response, you do it because you love your God and it's your act of sacrifice to Him, that's really sharing. There's a big difference between sharing and investing. Because in investment, you expect something in return. And yet here in the fellowship of the body of Christ, He desires that we share. We extend to someone, and it becomes our act of sacrifice to Him. While reading the text also, while studying, I asked the question, what is the logical reason why did God take your actions to other people as if you are doing it for Him? Because the idea here is that this is a new kind of sacrifice. You do something good to others, you share to others, and what you're doing to the people around you is exactly the thing that you are doing to me. It is like that. The idea is like that. And I tried to study further, and I found out two possible reasons. One possible reason is that the person seated right next to you is bought by the blood of Jesus. The value of that person is now dependent on the price that Christ paid so that He could get that person from death. That person is so valuable to Him. And if you begin to value that person the way He did, I think you are really honoring Him because He's the one who paid for it. I'll give you an example. I would invite someone to go to a shoe store. And then I would tell him, okay, you choose, and then I'll pay. And then he chose a shoe, a pair of shoes, and then he brought it home, and I'm happy because I just paid for it, and he's happy. Then I'm so glad that he's happy. But one day, I visited his house, and I saw the pair of shoes that I bought for him, just right there at the corner, so dirty. It's still, I think it's still okay to be used. It's still presentable. However, he just left it at the corner without cleaning it, without taking care of it. Ginagat na ng aso yung liston, naputol na, pero dapat pwede pa. What will I feel? As the one who paid for it, I would say, you did not value what I paid for you. You did not value my gift to you. It's just that kind of feeling. God bought that person right next to you. Not with $1 million. He bought it with His life. And when you begin to value that fellow believers, somebody whose price tag now is the cross of Jesus, somebody that Christ died for, when you value that person, you are now showing to God, Lord, this is my sacrifice for you. I value this person too. This is your way of worshiping Him also. I found out another reason, which I believe also very significant. If you go back to Genesis, the time of creation, God made everything, and at the end of it, He made man. And He said something like this in verses 26 and 27, chapter 1. Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. And then verse 27 affirms that, saying, God made man according to His image. According to His likeness, He created them. Male and female, He created them. Now take note of this. Regardless of the physical appearance of your seatmate, regardless of the smell of that person, reality is that that person is a bearer of God's image. That person is directly related to God. And that is why when you begin treating that person with also value, with love, with care, I think God is going to be honored and be glorified. That becomes your act of worship. There is an image of God in that person. Theologians would argue. Some would say the image of God is totally removed from man when Adam and Eve committed sin. Some theologians would say no, it's just there, it's marred, it's dirt by sin, but it's still there. But to those individuals, regardless of these two ideas, when Christ died on the cross, I believe that image of God is redeemed in a person's life. If it's lost, it's redeemed. If it's still there, it's cleaned. It's there. That person seated right beside you is a bearer of God's image. And when that person bears God's image and you love him, you take care of him, you share what you have, you do good to that person as if you are also doing good to the God who gave that image to that person. A wonderful thing to think about. A bearer of God's image. So out of the grace that God has given us, out of the love that Christ has put in our hearts, we also share the same to the fellows surrounding us. That's why the writer of the book of Hebrews is saying here, do not neglect doing good and sharing. Why? Because for with such sacrifice, God is pleased. So when I do something good to my fellow believers, when I share to my fellow believers not only my resources, but my life, my time, my whatever God has given to me, then that becomes my sacrifice to Him, and that becomes a pleasing sacrifice before my God. Because that person is not only bought by Christ, not only that God has put value in the person's life, but that person is an image bearer of God. You know, sometimes when something happens to someone, we don't care very much. But when that person is closely related to us, then we feel bad if something bad happens to that person. May nangurot sa bata, kawawa naman yung bata, huwag kang ganyan. Sasabihin mo yung nangurot, huwag kang ganyan, kawawa naman. Pag anak mo yung kinurot, I tell you, you would have a different reaction. Why? Because there is something in that child that came from you as a parent. That is why the heart of the mother, when a child or daughter or a son is hurt, you would really see how a mother would react. Why? Because there is something in the child that came from the mom. And in the same sense, there is something in every believer that came from God. It's His image within that person's life. That is why when we do something good, when we share to our neighbors, to our fellow believers, then we are doing that thing to our God. It is my prayer that we would learn to do this sacrifice. Sometimes it's really a sacrifice. Why? Because there are really people around us that we may not like. But you begin conversing with the person and tell him, you know what? If not only for the image of God, if not only for the love of God for you and in my heart, I cannot love you, I think. Because we are different from each other. Kusugay ka mang insulto, di ko ganahan nimo. Why you don't like the person? But because the love of Christ has been experienced in your life, and you know that He is bearing God's image, and you know that Christ bought Him for a price, then you would tell Him, I love you. Not with your love, with the love of the Lord. That's why we say that line. Meaning to say, even if you're unlovable, even if you don't deserve this kind of treatment, even if you don't deserve my kindness, I will show it to you. Why? Because of God. This is my act of sacrifice to Him. It's a beautiful thing. But always remember that whatever you do to your fellow is the exact thing that you are doing for God. Jesus said this. Let's open our Bibles in the book of Matthew, chapter 25. Beginning with verse 40. These were the words of Jesus. He said here, the king will answer and say to them, truly, I say to you, to the extent that you did it to one of these brothers of mine, even the least of them, you did it to me. And he continued in verse 42. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. Naked, and you did not clothe me. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me. These were the words of Jesus to those who were listening to Him. He was relating this to those individuals surrounding Him that time. And this is a truth that the believer should know, that when we do something to others, as if we are doing that thing to our God. I remember a story. There was a man whose name is Franklin. Franklin was a cobbler. A cobbler is someone who mends or repairs shoes or makes shoes or creates other leather products. So he's a cobbler. One day, he had a dream. He slept and then had this dream. In his dream, he had a chance to meet Jesus. And so he was so excited. He communicated with the Lord, and the Lord just talked to him. He enjoyed the very presence of his master. At the end of their conversation, Jesus told him, Franklin, I will see you tomorrow in your shop. I will visit you. And so when he woke up, he remembered his dream. And it was still very vivid. It was so clear he could never forget a single portion of it. And so he was so excited. He stood up and then prepared himself and went to his shop, cleaned every corner of it, wiped every shelf, and then he was so excited. He prepared a cake, and then he also prepared his coffee. He's ready to brew once Jesus comes in. He said, what if he comes in? Because he said to me in my dream that he's gonna come. So he was there, he was preparing, and after everything, he sat down and began to wait. While he was there seated, he saw a beggar who was passing by right in front. He was just behind the glass, and he saw the beggar walking without any footwear. And he felt compassion to the guy. And so Franklin said, why will I not call him? So he went out and said to him, come in. I want you to choose a pair of shoes. And the beggar said, I don't have money, sir. And he said, just choose. I felt compassion seeing you walking without any footwear. And so the old beggar chose. And then when he found what he wanted, he said thank you to Franklin and he left. Franklin felt good about it. But he was still waiting for Jesus. And so he sat down again. An hour passed by. Still, there was no Jesus. And then somebody knocked on the door. He was so excited. But when he opened the door, he found out that it was just an old lady. An old lady bringing 2 huge bags. And the lady said to him, sir, I would like to find this street. And so she named the street. But I think I'm lost already. And so Franklin told her, why don't you come in first? And I'm going to offer you some drinks. He gave her water. She drank. And then he told her, let's go. I'll help you find the street. But I could not stay long out there because somebody is coming. So come, I'll help you. He carried the bags of the lady. And then when they found the street just so near, he left her and said, okay, you found the street now, I'll go back to my shop. And so he went back, he rushed in because he was trying to save all the time, and he wanted to really catch his master if Jesus would arrive. He sat again. The whole morning, no Jesus came. In the afternoon, about 2 o'clock, another person knocked on his door. He was so excited. And then he opened the door. It was a little boy. The little boy said, sir, I'm so hungry. Do you have something to eat? And then Franklin said, why don't you come in? And so he offered him some cakes and then offered him some drinks. While they were there, the boy enjoyed also eating the cake, and he noticed that Franklin prepared a lot. And he said, why do you have a lot of food here? Are you waiting for someone? And then Franklin said, yes. Last night, somebody told me he is coming, and he is so important to me. So I have prepared all these things for him. But since you came, then I'm willing to share it to you. And so after taking some snacks, the boy left already. But Franklin was wondering, where is Jesus? It was already about 6 o'clock in the evening, and he said, I think I need to close my shop. He closed his shop, and he was disappointed because he waited for the Lord, and the Lord never came. He went home. During the night, he kept on pondering on those things that had happened. Lord, where are you? You said you'll be coming. And so he slept. He dreamed again. And in his dream, he saw Jesus again. And so the first statement that came out of his mouth was, where were you? I was waiting for you the whole day. I prepared cakes. I prepared coffee for you, but you didn't arrive. And you know what the Lord told him? Franklin, I knocked on your door 3 times. I was on your floor 3 times. The presence of the old beggar, the old man, the old lady, and the little boy actually were the presence of God that he experienced. He shared to them. And whatever he did to them, he did to his master. Whatever you'll do to your fellow, I believe in that way of sacrifice, God would be pleased. God bless us all, and good morning.